Welcome back, all you Regs and all you Shinies. Welcome to the most mediocre podcast in the Star Wars universe, the 1313 Podcast. I'm Tommy.
I'm Jackson. No Jacob.
No Jacob once again, and that's okay. But today we have another edition of Have a Chat, our series where we invite other Star Wars creators and members of the community onto the podcast to discuss their experience with Star Wars, and we just kind of have a nice conversation about our favorite franchise. So, today's guest is the Chosen One Star Wars Podcast. Woohoo!
Thanks, guys, for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's as you know, it's quite late here in Northern Ireland where I'm based, so hoping I can stay awake and I don't bore you guys to sleep over there a bit earlier. But yes, so the Chosen One Star Wars Podcast, just started that this year, basically.
Oh, nice.
And currently just on Twitter, Instagram, and whatever podcast service you might have out there as well. I currently I'm hoping, see you guys are obviously on YouTube, I'm hoping to get YouTube at some stage sorted. I've just got my lens there for that to start at some stage, hopefully in the future, but moved house and everything else, it's been chaos, so we'll get to that at some point, but currently just on the three platforms, mainly Twitter, I guess. Instagram's kind of not really my generation of things, to be honest, but we'll get there as well with that, and mainly just focusing on trying to record as much as possible and get as much content out there. So I have to be honest, I've only come across you guys as well probably about 2 weeks ago at the most, and been great content so far, so really appreciate that too, and grateful to be on.
Yeah, well, thank you for the compliment. As far as YouTube goes, YouTube is definitely what takes the most of our energy for the podcast. So like most weeks, I'll do the editing because like we try to dish it out evenly. So Jackson does a lot of like the social networking. Yeah. He'll do a lot of like the posting, because on days that we have a podcast, normally I'm in class when it goes up. So he'll post on social media, and then I do most of like the editing, the YouTube video. And it like between like the streaming, like, or not the streaming service, the editing software you have to get, and then like learning the editing software, and like as we get more episodes out, I'll like monkey around with different things, and I'll try different like I started like adding pictures in on episodes when we're talking about a certain topic or a certain thing, and people seem to like that. So it's definitely a learning curve.
Yes, for sure.
And it's like very time consuming, but it's always like
time consuming is the main thing that I hear from it anyway, and yeah.
it's I think what kills me is a couple times this has happened. This cloud that I use for the editing software won't sync in time, so you'll have like a half done project and you'll spend 2 hours downloading the project to your laptop, and then you get done and you look at it and it's like, oh, well, there goes an hour and a half of work, so then you have to go back and do it all over again.
Yeah. That's as I was saying just before we came on live there, and just with being in pastor, and obviously with COVID, everything hitting, whenever I was in the church for a while, everything went online, and so it's just like we had to go onto YouTube, and I was only doing short clips. I didn't do a full service online, but even that 5, 10, 15 minutes, it was your whole week was really spent, and people were saying, oh, you're not doing anything anymore, and I was like, no, it's a lot busier even now than ever. So yeah, kind of whenever I'd actually started the podcast initially, I have clips and images and things that I had planned to kind of just do the audio and not maybe video and record myself for them, but just have images kind of scroll up. But even that, just getting the images, getting the clips from the Clone Wars, for example, like that takes forever. Never mind putting it into an actual video and then uploading it. So yeah, it'll be a work in it's not a work in progress, but hopefully someday it will be. So.
Yeah. No, I definitely see what you mean. When we first started doing this as well, because we had originally decided that we wanted to do audio, but then we were like, oh, maybe we could do a YouTube segment as well for people who would want to watch that. And we have like a 2-day buffer from when we record, from when the episode releases for us to edit it. And it was a nightmare those first couple of weeks because we had no clue what we were doing. It would take an entire
I think
day.
Sometimes just even trying to be, especially when it comes to podcasts, it's you're putting content out there. You are trying to more focusing on the conversation rather than the images to a degree. And yes, you want the videos to be as good as possible, but at the same time, I think sometimes you just have to bite the bullet, realize that it's not really profitable to sit all week and try and be a perfectionist about it. But I'm perfect for things like that, and even my son is 4, and probably said that already, but he was drawing something earlier and he's like giving off about how bad it was. He says it's not perfect, and he definitely got that from me. So just this whole idea, if you're trying to get it to perfection, then you just don't do anything at all. So most of the episodes that have been released so far are basically me just like throwing the arms up saying, right, I've got my notes, I'm just going to go for it, and hardly listen even to it again, and just upload it as it is and go from there as much as possible. So otherwise there'd be nothing released at all. So just have to get on with it sometimes. But that's all good fun.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think another thing too is like you said, just winging it. Like really, like you can be as prepared as possible with your notes, like all day long. But like sometimes the energy just isn't there. Like there have been weeks where we record and we go through a podcast and like we're like, yeah, that was okay, and then like that podcast performs better than the 3 podcasts prior to that where we felt like our energy was better. And it's just so funny that like how that works. Like it's like it's always the ones that surprise you that you're always like, what? Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, I agree.
You thought that they were the ones that were thrown together, and all of a sudden it's the ones that are getting most listens.
Yeah.
No, I definitely know what that's like in various walks of life, and podcasting's no different. So, but yeah, it's all kind of new to me as well. Podcasting, even in general, I'd never listened to podcasts until Disney Plus came over to us in the UK here, and that's obviously when Mandalorian. I hadn't seen Mandalorian even. I know a lot of guys over here in the United Kingdom were probably watching it through other means, illegally or whatever. But I did wait, to be honest, and thought I'll try and do this right and wait until it comes out properly. And that was only, I can't even remember, it wasn't really that long ago before season 2 came out. And it was kind of just after listening and watching a couple of things, I was kind of a bit curious about some of the characters that I'd forgotten about really, and I have no idea, but it must have been just Spotify. I came across as a Mando Cast, I think would have done.
That I recognize that
series.
name.
Yeah. So that was my first introduction to podcasts at all in general for anything really, and kind of just went from there. And just even talking to you guys this is the first. What would you put it?
Collaboration
I've had with with any other groups out there. And one of the reasons that I kind of started the podcast was because this is going to sound really sad, but I don't really know anybody that likes Star Wars apart from my 4-year-old, so that's why he's the only guest that's on my show. Because most people, like my brothers, I've got 3 younger brothers, and they all grew up sort of the Clone Wars was all their thing, but they never quite liked Star Wars as much as I did. Even though I didn't even watch the Clone Wars at that stage, I just kind of it was kind of a bit of an odd one. The original trilogy was what I remember getting first at the very beginning back in America whenever I lived there for a while. And I'll never forget the gold VHS set that Dad came home with, and that was it. I don't even remember watching the movies, but I just remember opening and closing the box, because it's a bit like, the iPhone boxes you get. It's just sort of like there's just something satisfying about it opening and closing. Well, that's one of the main things I remember as like a 6-year-old or whatever, back in '98 whenever all that came out and was released. And then I think I remember watching episode 1 in '98 whenever it was all obviously the Phantom Menace was what everybody was talking about at my age at that stage. But then we moved. My dad's a missionary and pastor as well, so we were moving about the world back and forth here and there, everywhere. So after Phantom Menace came out, we moved from America to Jamaica. And again, nobody in Jamaica was really that bothered by Star Wars. It wasn't really on the radar for any of the guys I was running about with. So episode 2 and 3, literally I didn't even think about it until I was about probably 10 years later.
Wow.
So it was such a massive gap, and so my Star Wars experience is quite bizarre, I guess, compared to most people's. But yeah, so there's all that sort of back and forth that I have in my head, and the podcast with the Mandalorian sort of has just brought it all back into the forefront again, and sort of spent last year and during lockdown just eating up the Clone Wars, to be honest, and just I thought that was brilliant. So, but that's kind of how I've got to where I'm at the moment, and with the podcast, it's more just kind of to get speaking to guys like yourselves, and I guess for me, family wise as well, just something to do with my kid, to be honest. And I thought that was kind of cool actually with yourselves. I don't know whose dads are being referenced at certain times, but just the fact that you guys have that generational thing as well, and that's what I want for my guys as well here. So my wife's not all that keen my little girl, who's one getting involved in Star Wars. But this morning, since Jonah wasn't at school, we had a Star Wars morning, and we had Revenge of the Sith on, and she was sitting in her high chair eating her breakfast, and she was just glued to the screen, and my wife Anna was just like, "This isn't happening, Aaron. It's not happening." She hates Star Wars, so this is why I have to sort of vent on podcasting. So that's where I'm at with that. But
that's definitely super interesting. I feel like with your story as well, that's like super unique, because I'll admit, like, a lot of people who especially like grew up with the OT specifically are like, oh, like I got to see it in the theaters as soon as it came out, and like that's how they like traditionally saw everything. But like for you, I feel like that's definitely like really cool. I mean, especially to travel as well with all that.
Yeah, they sort of mix things up a bit, and it is really. I was thinking about this today because I kind of figured you guys would. When you're coming on, I haven't actually talked about any of this in my own podcast before, but you do sort of, like, I think it's interesting here about your background, and even just seeing the back wall for the podcast you guys have there initially, it's just like, that just blows my mind, even seeing that every time I go onto YouTube. But just everybody has a different story as to how it's impacted them, but I was thinking about it today, and I really don't remember watching the movies. Whenever I was younger, it was more the kind of everything that came around them, so like the experiences with Dad bringing that home in America. So I almost sort of tie the movies in with areas that I've lived, if that sort of sounds really strange. Yeah. But so like the original trilogy was introduced to me in whenever that gold box set came out, it was 97 or something, just before episode 1. And so I kind of think of Indianapolis, where I lived at that time for a couple of years, and you think about the cold winters and everything else, and then we moved to Jamaica, and the only reference to Star Wars I had were the action figures, and that was kind of in the sweltering heat, and Dad lying on the ground in the living room, sort of shooting each other with these little bullets and stuff, whatever they might have been, and starships, whatever you might have had at that stage. But the movies were kind of, they're always there in the background, but it wasn't so much in the forefront, which is again a bit odd for somebody that's doing a Star Wars podcast at the moment, but it's just the way it was for me. So
I think that, honestly, like, that's super interesting that you were going around places that weren't the States, because, like, here in the States, Star Wars is this huge, gigantic thing. You say the words Star Wars, and everybody knows what it is. Even if they've never seen any movies or anything, everyone in the States knows what it is. And so I have, like, always thought, like, what is it like for people like that are like overseas and stuff? Because like, I mean, we do a lot of like action figure collecting, and I know like with that stuff, like the United States gets a lot of product more easily accessible than other countries do, and like even like in Europe and stuff, like, you know, you'd think that it'd be a little bit more on par with one another, but like just the level of how viral Star Wars is seems like it's amplified in the States versus everywhere else.
I think for us, and again, I'm maybe not, I don't want to speak for everybody in Jamaica and everybody in Northern Ireland and the places that I've been to, but especially for the guys I run about with here, it was something that we kind of we would have watched, went through, but you didn't talk about it. It was kind of if you watch Star Wars, especially, and I'm thinking about like sort of primary age, sort of grade school, whatever you guys would refer to it as. You were in my sort of age group. I'm 29, coming at the end of the month, so kind of gives you an idea of where I'm at age wise. But from my generation here, it was definitely, you're the oddball in the circles I was in. That may not be across the board. But it's kind of funny though, because whenever I was starting the podcast, I just happened to say to this guy that I would try and go surfing with every now and then, who I've known for years, and he's exactly the same as me. He's sort of chewing up the Clone Wars and chewing up all this stuff in the background, but he hasn't said it until I kind of broke the conversation. I've known this guy for probably 10 years now as well, and never knew that he watched Star Wars. He never knew that I watched Star Wars. You just kind of kept it to yourself, and we're quietly enjoying it in the background. So it's sort of odd in my experience that way, and that's again why the podcast is a bit of an outlet for that. So, but that's that's just the way things are for me. And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody in Northern Ireland, but you don't often see too many people running or having big Star Wars events or doing things like that over here, from what I know of anyhow. But again, I'm fairly new to that whole scene on social media from my country as a whole. There's some things down in the south of Ireland that seem to be a bit more organised with different groups, kind of charity events and things run, but I don't really see too much up here in the north, to be honest. So that's unfortunate, but just the way things are at the moment. And if anybody's watching this that does know something in Northern Ireland, maybe have other viewers in my part of my neck of the woods, definitely give us a shout out to keep in touch that way. Just sorry to use your platform for that, but
no, you're fine. That's like the whole. Well, so there were two main reasons that we even decided to do this podcast. The first, the primary reason being that myself, Jackson, and then Jacob, who's the third host for the show, we would spend in high school just hours and hours and hours just talking about Star Wars, especially my senior year of high school, because I'm a couple years ahead of Jackson and Jacob.
You're 1 year ahead of me.
2 years Jacob, 1 year you. Yeah. So to clarify, but no, we would always talk about it. So over the summer, this past summer, we were just talking. We were like, what if we just did a podcast and just literally took the conversations that we have about Star Wars on an Xbox party and just talked about it, put it on the internet, see what people think. And so right at the beginning, we were like, if nobody listens to it, that's fine, because it's just the three of us having fun. And now we've kind of built this really awesome community around it, and that's really what it is our goal is to create an interconnected community of Star Wars fans who all come from different places. They like different things about Star Wars, different parts of Star Wars, and everybody has something different about the franchise that means something to them. So that's it's a way, it's a hub almost for all these people and all these creators to kind of intermingle and kind of find other people, like you said, from your neck of the woods, for example. I know we have a couple listeners that come back every week that are from the UK. So
yeah. Well, it's interesting to see. I would listen to the Star Wars Sessions as well, and they're UK. I don't know if you've come across them on their podcast, but they're two guys in England. And it sort of seems to me that that's kind of the way things start. Just you have those general conversations in the coffee shop or in school or whatever it is, and then you think logically, as you would, to move it on to a podcast and just start recording those and spreading them out. I think that was their story as well. And that's kind of, I felt like I didn't have that. I don't think the guy that I go surfing with would be all that bothered by doing a podcast, to be honest, either about it. He likes it, but I don't know if he'd want to co-host one as such. But it's just, if you've nobody else to talk to about it, just talk to yourself. And sometimes bring your 4-year-old in, and if anybody listens, well, sure. But it's kind of, that's all as an added bonus. And if you get a couple listens, I try to stay clear of actually that aspect. And YouTube is probably a bit more dangerous in terms of getting into looking at the viewer counts and everything else compared to podcasting. I think those stats are sort of off in the background somewhere in my podcasting type of things. But I do try to just do it. Look, I'm going to have a chat about the Clone Wars episode and draw some thoughts about it, and probably get into too much philosophical thinking that maybe it seems a bit too deep for a child cartoon, as it might be described at sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's just me kind of gabbling on about something that I've taken from it, and everybody else can take that or leave it in a sense, and take the meat out and spit out the bones, as we would say over here. Maybe you guys say that too, but just chew on the good stuff, and whatever you don't like that's said, then you can move on from it. So, but yeah, no, it's all good fun. Especially when the 4-year-old comes in.
My mother always says, it's okay to talk to yourself, just as long as you're not answering yourself. That's how it. Yeah. But
that's it.
No, I think with the whole social media aspect, it absolutely, it can get really hard to not get sucked into, we're not getting as many views, or we lost a subscriber or something like that. But you have to have your heart has to be in it. Exactly. And I think that's how it is for the three of us, is we lost a subscriber. Oh well, I'm sorry that they didn't like what we're putting out, but it's not, doesn't mean that we're gonna change what we're doing or like try to adapt to get more people to come in, because I'd rather have a small community of people that like our content the way we're making it every day of the week than like have thousands and thousands of people come in because we're doing what's popular or because we're doing like what would be considered mainstream, you know?
Yeah, I was gonna say too, especially like with our guests and stuff, it's kind of funny bringing that, because when we've checked our analytics on YouTube, and then we use Anchor as like our host for like our audio and whatnot. So like on YouTube we have like a very, like, it's very much an American audience, like people like in America like are watching our YouTube stuff. But when we go to Anchor and look, it's tons of people from other countries. Like we have people in the UK, Germany, and Brazil, and then there was like New Zealand was one.
Philippines?
Yeah, the Philippines as well. And we're like, that's freaking cool.
It's like the coolest thing to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe get some feedback actually then that way in terms of how other people from other countries have experienced Star Wars then too, just like we were saying earlier. But yeah, it is even the podcasting end of things. It's just a lot more accessible for like me. I listen to the podcast. I've got an hour commute into work, into the city, and that's kind of the only time that I would probably give to podcasting and listening to stuff. And maybe sometimes about the house, but that doesn't generally work with Jonah screaming about the place running around or Maya not being well or something. So you kind of just make the most of the time. So YouTube is, I need to be careful what I say here. I work from home a couple of days a week too. So sometimes the work laptop might be there and maybe you guys might be on in the background. So don't know if that's all legit, but I guess if you're in the office you'd be talking to somebody else anyhow. So YouTube is good for that. Even just with your end in terms of visuals too. You guys have the Black series that we refer to, and I don't really have too much of that, to be honest. But it is just interesting to see those things as well. So YouTube definitely has its benefits for that.
Exactly.
I mean, and it's a lot of fun too, because YouTube gives us a lot more of an opportunity to interact with people, and that's part of the reason that we made a Discord, was because we wanted to interact with the people that watch our podcast or listen to it, especially the people that listen to it, because like I want to know from those people. I want to hear from the people that listen to our podcast, and I want to talk to them about Star Wars, because that's the other thing. Like, you know, Star Wars is big in the States, but like on our college campus,
it's not.
We are a very small minority of people that like are very openly Star Wars fans. Like, people will see you on campus. Oh, hey, that's the Star Wars guy. He's the guy that does the podcast, and you're just like,
all my friends at school dog on me too for doing the show. Everybody in like my RTC and whatever like dogs on me for doing this show.
Well, to be honest, there's very few people that actually know, and it's very difficult that now. I haven't told hardly anybody. My dad, he's the one that kind of introduced me to Star Wars, but when I told him I was coming on to this show tonight, he just looked at me like, "What? You're going on to somebody else's show? Are you really taking this seriously now then?" Or I don't think he realized that I'm doing a podcast even myself yet. And even I have another podcast I do more for the sort of religious stuff that I do in the background as well. And even that, I haven't even said anything to very many people about, because I'm the sort of person that I'm quite an introvert, even though I'm engaged in public speaking. It's sort of a bit of a bizarre thing as well, a bit of a contradiction of terms, but I just don't really like the whole world knowing what I'm doing, I guess, and I'm just sort of a bit odd that way, to be honest. So the podcast is definitely an outlet for that too. But I make myself sound really weird the more I talk about all this.
We have said some of the most cringe things on the podcast. Like as of recently, it's been the 1313 cringe cast is the joke, because like we just say things, and like there will be moments where I'll say something and I think it's funny in my head, and I'll look over and Jackson and Jacob are just like, "Bro, did you just say that?" And I'll just be like, "I think I did."
Yeah.
But
I don't want to bring the bunny up, but I guess you're waiting for that to be brought up there, Jackson.
Oh no.
The bunny.
The bunny girl, yeah. Do we want to?
I've heard references to this bunny girl, but I haven't actually seen you say that yet, so I'll have to find that somewhere.
It was we were on a have a chat. Like we were doing an interview like this, and with Jackson with Lukeness Monster. Okay. Yeah.
So the original bit was that he was talking about it. And I was like, dang, this will make him really roar. And I was like, bro, the bunny girl in that, it's going to be so hot. And everybody was like, pause. It was so funny. But, like, the ironic part for me, is that from watching Visions, the episode that she's in is what I consider to be the best one. Because I thought
it's so ironic. It's so ironic. Because it is one of my favorite ones, too, from Visions.
I'll not ask you the reasons why.
Sure. I mean, like, specifically, like, in it, have you watched it yet?
Yeah, we watched.
Okay, so yeah, like, the connection between, like, Lope and Ocho, like, specifically, like, really resonated with me and, like, my brother, because me and my brother are very, very close, so, like, I really felt that bond with it as well. I also really liked the take on the fact that it was, like, the modern Imperial Army, like, in, like, essentially like what could be like a canon situation of Star Wars, like what a lot of other planets are seeing at the moment, as the Republic had stayed too long for its occupation, and we're now using politics to be like, hey everybody, we're going to improve your system, you know. And obviously Ocho's like temptation to the dark side for what she feels is best, although the Imperials are obviously tricking her just to get at her dad. The lightsaber was cool. I'm going to stick by it, saying that the lightsaber is yellow.
It is yellow.
It is?
I was looking at promotional, because he's colorblind.
Yeah, I'm colorblind, so I couldn't tell.
But it was, like, that episode was really, really good. I liked the messaging about, like, imperialism and, like, industrialization, and, like, the effects that it can have on, like, the people that are being imperialized.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very well executed, too. I really like when Star Wars is clever, and the Clone Wars does a lot of that. Like you said, you've been watching the Clone Wars a lot. There's one specific arc, and I've brought this up on the show before. It's have you watched the one when they're on Mon Cala, the water world, and they're like fighting with the Gungans and the Mon Calamari and all those? Have you seen that one yet?
That must be like season 3 or something.
It's like season 4 or 5, I want to say. Right. But yeah, so have you seen it?
I've seen them all. I can sort of vaguely remember there being a battle.
There's like the shark dude.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a scene in one of the episodes where Prince Lee Char, the Prince Mon Cala Prince, he's in with like all the people in the prison camp, and he says like something about when I come back you will see me as your king, and then it like pans out and he's like swimming, and he's like posed like Jesus on the cross. And so you look at something like that, and it's like, oh, this is supposed to be a kid's cartoon, blah, blah, blah. But I think a lot of people, for some reason, correlate children with, like, not being, like, they're not smart enough to understand concepts and references to our real world. And I think that the Clone Wars, as a kid, who I was, like, 10 years old when the Clone Wars was like in its prime, and so growing up with it, like I was able to pick up on that stuff. Like I remember when I was a small child and I saw that episode, but I was like, yeah, like it's just so cool that they are being so clever, because it makes kids think. It makes kids, and I think that that's part of what makes Star Wars so special. Is it's like got the flashy, explosions and the lightsabers, and like it's got that wonder aspect to it, but it's got so many awesome messages. Like I think my favorite one about Star Wars is like found family and finding the strength within yourself to be able to solve problems, instead of relying on things like the Force and things like that to solve your problems. A lot of the messaging is finding it within yourself. So
but to reel it back to the bunny. Sorry, no, you go. I apologize.
Oh, Jackson says back to the bunny. Let's hear what we talking about.
The animation was good. That's the last point. I really liked it.
Yeah. No, there's so much actually in what you're saying there about the themes, and I think that's why, like I have to say, I love all Star Wars in varying degrees.
Okay.
By the way I put it. And there's certain, obviously, ones that are going to be lower and blah blah blah. I'm not getting into that.
That's how it is.
But the Clone Wars definitely for me. Yes, there's so much of it that that you don't get for the full story of Star Wars. There's some arcs and things that are there, and there's just a bit of fun for the kids. And there's nothing wrong with that. By any stretch of the imagination, I think I probably would have struggled, to be honest, watching it. Like if it was being released now, being able to watch all of the full 7 seasons in like probably less than 7 weeks, and it made it a lot easier. But just the messaging was the kind of thing that kept me going through it, and not that I agreed with the messaging. To be honest, some of the things that are there, the reason it kind of tugged on me a bit is probably because I didn't agree with it. There's some things that maybe not quite sure whether, and this is talking about the Clone Wars, which was obviously made a brave while ago, and even if you come back up to season 7, there's not very much messaging that people probably would disagree with, but it kind of made me question my own understanding of real life, and I think that's kind of what kept me on it. Even just I always call them lucky lines because I can never remember the actual line that it is. What do you call those lines at the beginning of the episodes?
Oh,
fortune cookies. Is that what they call them?
Yeah.
Do they call them fortune cookies for some reason?
They're called fortune cookies. Yeah.
I always forget every single time I go to mention it in the podcast. I always have to say lucky line because I can't think of anything else. The fortune cookies, just take a note of those and thinking about them, and whether you agree with them or disagree with them, it makes you think nonetheless. And that's kind of what tugged me into the Clone Wars. And yeah, Rebels is great, but it wouldn't be without the Clone Wars. The prequels are great, but I don't think they would be without the Clone Wars. The Mandalorian's great, but again, I don't think they would be without the Clone Wars. And the sequels are the only ones that are kind of out there that the Clone Wars don't affect too much. But definitely, I think the Clone Wars just ties everything together, and that's kind of where my love for Star Wars, I guess, kind of was rekindled, if you want to use that term in a sense. And I was watching that all last year, so, and I'm so annoyed actually that I've only watched it last year, that this was all going on in the background. It's the same with the books actually as well. Like whenever I was a kid, I used to read books all the time, and if I had known that there was a whole section in the library filled with Star Wars books, I would just probably devour them. But again, I didn't know about Timothy Zahn until last year, and all that stuff. So we'll get into that at some stage. But
I highly recommend reading Timothy Zahn's new Thrawn books, even if you just get to read the first one, because I'm in the middle of the third one, and I honestly haven't picked it up in like 8 months, but that's just because I'm too busy all the time. But the first one that I read, I couldn't put it down, and I couldn't like, it was just keeping me so engaged. And Thrawn was a character, like, yeah, he was in Rebels and he was cool, but as someone who never read Heir to the Empire, like, my dad had read it, but like, so I knew of Thrawn because like growing up I had a Thrawn action figure, but like I never thought anything of it. Then I read this book, and Thrawn is my favorite Star Wars character of all time because of that book. Like, it's so I highly recommend reading that. It's very thought provoking.
I actually picked it up. I picked up the original 3. I actually have. I've been trying to get through this one. This is the Heir to the Empire.
Yeah.
And I keep getting to a certain point, and I'm horrific with reading, no matter what, whether it's Star Wars or anything. Normally I'm like reading 5 or 6 books at a time, and I never finish any of them, because a lot of the reading I do for work purposes is kind of more referencing stuff. So I'll dip into a chapter that I need, or dip into a character study that I need to look at or whatever. But reading a book from cover to cover is something I struggle with for some reason. But I bought the original 3, and at the same time, must have been January, just after Christmas, I bought then the new ones. And I think the new ones came first in the post, so I started reading it. And I started reading that first one, and like you said, you couldn't put it down, but I was like, I can't read this until I've read the original 3 first, so I have to get through them, because I do want to get to, even if I don't read the rest of them, I want to get to that first, the second trilogy, because it definitely was the first couple of chapters were brilliant. So, and actually I was reading it to my son going to bed, some of those, and he was wanting me to read it, and then I went to Heir of the Empire whenever I got it, in the post, and he wasn't that excited about it. Let me just put it that way. Especially the chapter when you're is it like, let me just spoil some of it, but I think isn't it maybe chapter 2 or 3 or whatever. You're talking about Leia having the pregnancy and the baby's kicking and stuff, and I'm just like, this doesn't really feel like Star Wars. all the details about a woman being pregnant. But so he wasn't that interested, and it's kind of taken me a bit longer to get through it, to be honest. But one of the things I find with the books is the pronunciation of the names and the planets and the characters, not knowing what they're actually meant to be. Really gets on my nerves, because it really makes it difficult to kind of keep on top of who's who, where's where, and what's what. If you can't remember the name from the previous page because you couldn't pronounce it then. But yeah, that's just one of the problems with the books. And we'll get through them at some stage as well.
It was also a much different time back in, I think those were written in the 80s, I want to say 80s and 90s. So like that was a much different time for like literature than things are now. Everything is much more like, it's quick, it's action packed. You know, they want to keep you engaged, whereas like things are a little bit more slow back then. And also there was a much different vision of Star Wars post Return of the Jedi than we have now, because back then it was really just everyone was just writing whatever they wanted, and they would just throw stuff at the wall, see what stuck. I mean, now you have...
Well, even if you compare this with Light of the Jedi, for example, like, you're probably in chapter 12 by the time you're in chapter 3 on Heir of the Empire. It's just, but that's what I loved about it. I haven't finished it yet either, but the first 15 chapters or whatever it is, or 10 that I have read, just that quick paced, it kind of suits me down to the ground as well. So just shows my level of attention is very, very low, but I guess everybody's in the same boat at the moment. So thanks, social media.
Yeah, right. I mean, God. I mean, I notice it too. Like I really have to force myself sometimes to keep my attention span on one thing. Now, schoolwork doesn't count because I always hate doing schoolwork, so like I don't really count that. But
we get the break soon though. So
we have a break this Thursday and Friday, so we're just trying to push through these next 3 days and make it to the fall break, because this has been this semester's, because this is the first time we're going back to all in person. Yeah. Last year it was like we have a smaller college campus that we go to, so like it was like half online, half in person. So there was a lot of times where you could just chill out in your bed and log into class. But the other part of that is like I have a short attention span, so I would be on my phone during class, and like then I was like, oh, I'll just put my phone in the other room. Well, then I'm just literally sitting there twiddling my thumbs, and I'm like, yeah, I need to stop. So I'm glad that it's back all in person, but it's definitely been a struggle going back to that. And I think that that's also part of what made Star Wars go so viral recently in the States, was everyone was sitting at home. And all these people had nothing to do, and then, hey, Disney Plus is out. Let's watch The Mandalorian. Let's watch all of the Clone Wars, Rebels. You have all these multi-season shows that are done, you know, and you could just binge all of them. So I feel like it's brought a lot of people to the franchise. Yeah. Like newer fans. So, and I always appreciate talking to new fans.
For sure.
Yeah. No, it definitely has. One of the things that you obviously hear people on the toxic end of things going on about Disney, and I have my differences with Disney as well, but the reality is I wouldn't have watched the Clone Wars without Disney Plus. So exactly. The bottom line is I can't really complain at all with even the older stuff that's coming out, the droid cartoons and things, sticking that on for the kids. There's so much there that they brought to the table that wouldn't have been available without it. So have to say a big thanks that way. So keeps the kids quiet if nothing else. But that's...
So what's your favorite movie out of the ones that are out? What's your favorite Star Wars movie?
There's a part of me doesn't like saying it's Rogue One, but it has to be Rogue One.
No,
that is a great choice.
No, it's a good movie.
Yeah, I kind of feel bad. It's a bit like, you nearly feel like you're cheating on the rest of the franchise. But yeah, if I was to pick one to stick on it, and I'm going to be even worse and say the second will probably be Solo.
So that's another good choice. Solo is so underrated.
Facts.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. It's hard to kind of to pin it down as well. I think you guys probably know that yourself. You get asked the same question next week, and I might have a different answer to give.
My list always changes.
The one that's easy to watch, it maybe is because they're newer ones and you haven't seen them as much or whatever. But definitely Rogue One and Solo being a fun movie. Rogue One a bit more not fun. Everybody dying at the end, etc. So it's kind of those are good movies just to throw on. Like Revenge of the Sith was on earlier on today, and while it might have been my favorite for a while, there are bits that I was skipping through, to be honest. Not all that bothered by maybe if I was watching it on my own, but just even with my own as well, watching it, there's still some things that I'm not entirely sure if it's a good idea for him to be seeing it for. So,
hey, my dad did the same thing. My dad did the same thing with that movie.
Yeah. So, good movie, but well, they're all good. It's just I think that's maybe one of the things that makes the sequel trilogy a little bit lower down the list. Not because I didn't enjoy them, but more I kind of think sort of moved away from the family element with the creepiness of Exegol and all these other sort of things, especially in the last one there. That I just don't know if I could let Jonah watch that for quite a long time, which kind of almost spoils it for me in a sense, because I'm pretty sure we all would have sat down and watched the original trilogy and there wouldn't have been any issues with that. Sequel one kind of pushed the boundaries a little bit more, and The Mandalorian's brought that back in a bit. I don't think there's very much creepiness as yet. That I can think of off the top of my head that could maybe put you off watching it as a family, but definitely the family element of Star Wars is the main focus for me, just to have a bit of a break from real world and be able to sit down and just enjoy something that's not real. Without being creeped out.
So. Yo, you mean your son wouldn't like a zombie Palpatine in episode
9? Not at 4, no.
I wonder why. No.
I was going to put on the Terrifying Tales for him the other day, and then I kind of looked at my wife, and she looked at me as if like, "You sure it's going to be okay?" And I was like, "Well, it's a Lego movie. It should be fine."
Yeah.
But even watching it again there tonight, there's still so many things I'm just like, I don't really want him screaming at 4 a.m. because he's sort of picturing this creepy face that's talking to Kylo Ren about turning to the dark side. So there's just be things like that, but at some stage he'll eventually get it. So.
But yeah, I mean, so you said you were watching Terrifying Tales before we started recording. How did you did you get through it all the way?
Yeah, it just actually finished just before you sent the email through. I keep looking over here, by the way, because my TV's here. just in case. I kind of just realized a minute ago that I've been doing that quite a lot. But I'm talking to the TV because that's where I've watched everything that I'm talking about. So, but yeah, it was okay. Some of the stories, it's just you watch the Lego one for the comedy. That's for Asnald anyway. And the Maul. I actually wish I'd have written down the line whenever he's dismembering Grievous on the cliff top. I just thought that was brilliant, but that's because Maul's probably one of my favorite characters as well, so it doesn't really matter what he said. I probably would have thought it was great anyhow. But yeah, it was good show, but obviously it wouldn't be the top hitters.
Yeah, that's fine too.
I definitely like the holiday Lego special more. I thought that one was a lot more fun.
Yeah, well, it had a lot of wasn't that the one that had a lot of the references to the Rebels sort of World Between Worlds and stuff, was it?
Kind of, yeah.
Because it was all the different trilogies brought together, and then they all started fighting against each other, which was silly. It
was so funny. Darth Maul had no legs in that fight, so he's just hopping. The top half is just hopping. That was like I was in tears watching that.
Yeah.
That was so
well, that's the thing. I'm one of these people that you probably don't want to be in the cinema with you, because if you're watching a really stupid movie that nobody else is laughing at something, that I'll probably be, as you say, crying my eyes out, laughing in the corner about it. So, again, the wife's always giving me nudges, thinking just like, why do you even find that funny? But yeah, that's just the sort of humor I have as well.
Yeah, no, I feel it. The Lego really hits a sweet spot for me as well, I feel like, because I remember on Cartoon Network growing up with the Clone Wars, there was the Lego Yoda Chronicles, and the Lego team just does such a great job, I feel like, every time. It's just a banger. Every single time they want to do something.
Yeah, they seem to know. They just know what the you nearly think that it's a group of Star Wars fans have obviously just sat down and thought, right, how can we take the hand out of this as much as possible and still keep it real and true to the story. So it's there's actually was it one of the very last lines from the Terrifying Tales there, and Poe says something to is it Dean?
Dean, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dean, that they're going to meet Rey, and it's something like, I think she knows something about the Force or knows a little bit of the Force, and you're just like, is that kind of a sort of a tongue-in-cheek comment, or is it a serious comment that you're still kind of questioning as to what their opinion of the sequels were, and Rey and her knowledge of the Force, where that kind of goes. But yeah, they seem to push out the boat anyhow.
I think my favorite line from the Terrifying Tales was my favorite joke was when Darkseid Luke is getting trained by Vader, and they get to that little gap, and I was like, oh, this is where Leia kisses Luke in A New Hope, and then Vader kisses Luke, and I was like, that's awesome. That was so messed up. For luck. I was like, that's awesome. That couldn't have been any more well executed.
I was like, he what?
Okay. Yeah. To be honest, I think I've seen it maybe in a clip otherwise, but I was kind of going back and forth. I must have been making my coffee whenever that scene came on tonight there, but I did see it somewhere else. Somebody else had posted it or mentioned it anyhow. So yeah, and actually, somebody had just mentioned that scene from the A New Hope, and where was I was listening to that or watched on YouTube, where that was basically all. Lucas hadn't really planned that or hadn't intended it. Was it his wife that had wanted that to take part, just to kind of add a wee bit of a romantic feel. Although I'm not too sure how I feel about the romantic aspect. My youngest is 1, and
fair enough.
She was watching the end of, when was it, new last week? They had episode 2 on, and the end scenes is obviously the marriage and stuff. And I came into the living room, and my 1-year-old standing with her doll. I don't know who she was pretending it was a being, but it looked like she was just reenacting the scene of Anakin and Padme kissing at the end. And she's pointing at the doll and pointing at the TV, and I'm just like, yeah, you're okay. Don't be showing that again.
I could only imagine the traumatization of your 4-year-old watching episode 2 with the what is it? It's like, the ghost of your kiss
haunts me. I'm gonna be honest with you. I love Attack of the Clones, but like. There'll be like, unless I'm watching it with somebody where it's like their first time watching Star Wars and I'm sitting down with them to watch the movies, in that case I'll make them sit through the cringe with me. But like if I'm just watching Attack of the Clones, we're skipping right through all those scenes every single time, because I sit there and the hairs on the back of my neck just stand up and I'm like, oh my god, there's no way that this is happening right now.
No, well, I always try to sell Star Wars to my wife by saying there are some romantic bits in it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, she's seen the romantic bits from Attack of the Clones the other day, and she's just like, "Are you actually having a laugh?" So I didn't convince her to watch the rest of the movie in light of those conversations between Padme and Anakin.
That's so funny too, because my mother is the same way about Star Wars, and I don't know what it is, but my father has tried to get my mom to watch Star Wars multiple times, and I remember there was when I think it was a special edition of A New Hope was in theaters. My father took my mother to go see it, and she fell asleep in the theater watching it. And every time that we've tried to have my mom watch Star Wars, one of the movies, she always falls asleep. But I got her to watch, I think it was last year around Christmas time, I got her to watch the first episode of season 1 of The Mandalorian. And I probably spent 45 minutes just pausing it to explain different things, because my mother's one of those people where she needs everything like explained, like all the mini context and everything. I had to explain carbonite. I don't know how to explain carbonite. Like, I know how it works, but I don't, so I had to like stop and like be like, yeah, so this is the Bounty Hunters Guild. And she's like, what's that? I'm like, oh brother. But she liked it, so I think The Mandalorian's a really good one to introduce people to Star Wars, you know?
Yeah.
I got really lucky with my mom, I feel like, just because from my knowledge, she had not previously watched Star Wars until she met my dad, but she will actively watch the movies with us. Like, whenever The Mandalorian came out, we had to watch every episode with her, or like, if we were up early to duck hunt, we had to watch it and then say we didn't watch it, and then be like, hey mom, like watch the episode with us. But she really, really liked The Mandalorian.
This is like your fourth viewing. Secretly.
I think it was like in season 2, and whenever like when the Dark Troopers were like taking the baby or whatever, she was like, they're gonna harm it. Sean, I don't want to watch it. I don't want to watch it. That was really funny. Or like, she's gone to see like Empire Strikes Back came to the theaters here, like where we are in the States, so she would see that. But like, she's seen like every movie that's come out. Like when it comes out in the theaters, she's there like opening night with us to watch it as well.
That's awesome.
But she's invested in the most part.
Yeah. Well, I think the only one I've got my wife to go to was Rogue One probably, and Jonah was about like 6 weeks old, so I had him at the front row of the cinema in this little car chair or car seat, and I think she was more concerned about him screaming his head off and crying, but he's just slept through the whole thing, and I sat back.
Oh,
and
nice!
So,
you got really lucky,
to be honest,
because those people are the people that make me the most angry in the theater when they got their kid and their kid is just wailing, and they won't leave the theater. They won't leave. They'll just sit there and let their child cry, and I'm just like, I did not pay $8 to sit in this, but.
Well, that was kind of one of the reasons why I brought my wife as well, so that she could leave with the child.
Hey, that's smart, not hard.
But I think also when you look at like how special the experience can be, and I know that as more Star Wars content rolls out, I can only imagine how cool that must be as a father to experience Star Wars with your son, because I remember when the season 2 finale of The Mandalorian came out, my father and I watched it together, and for both of us, seeing that Luke Skywalker moment, it was like, like both of us were just like I was like welling up it with tears. My dad was too, and like we were just sharing that experience together. And that's again, like I talked earlier about found family in Star Wars. I have, through Star Wars, I have these special moments with so many people. Like I remember when the trail, and it sounds so nerdy and stupid, because if I talk to people about this on the street, oh, you're a nerd, you're a loser. But it's like, I remember when it got announced that the Clone Wars was being saved and they did that trailer, I cried. Like, I actually cried happy tears, and I sent my dad was at work, I sent the trailer to my dad, and he texted me back almost immediately and said, "This is fake." And I went, "No, Dad, look it. It's from the official Star Wars channel." And he like texted me back and he said, "I want to cry right now." And it's like, it's just so cool that this franchise is so unique in that it can mean that much to people. And I think that's why I love it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's maybe the ideal. Currently, I'm trying to instill in Jonah's head that Anakin Skywalker isn't Luke Skywalker still. So, he can't get this in his mind yet. So maybe in 15 years time or something, I'll be able to have that experience. But currently, it's just like, just having to explain everything over and over again. Although he has latched on to Captain Rex. That's his favorite.
It's a good character to pick.
That's a good character to
he's
be.
Definitely on the ball there. But there's something else you'd said that made me think about. What was that? I hate whenever you take mind blanks like this.
I was talking about just like the experience of like, like a father-son relationship.
Yes. You mentioned it. You mentioned the Clone Wars, and this is going to show my ignorance. But like, what was it left at season 6? And then was that the end?
Season 6. Well, season 5 was the end. Season 6 was the Netflix, like the lost episodes.
Season 5 was the last full season that they were able to release because Disney purchased Star Wars, and they were like, we don't want to work with Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
So we want to make our own show. So they allowed the team to release all the completely finished episodes, which was what was season 6. They released that on like DVD. It never aired on TV. It was just like a DVD release.
It was on Netflix for the longest time.
It was on Netflix
because I couldn't watch it because my family was like, "Great, we don't own Netflix." And then it eventually came out on DVD, so that's how I watched it. But then the last season was purely for Disney Plus.
Well, that would be a horrific season to end, and that last arc is probably my favorite arc. Isn't that in Ahsoka?
Ahsoka leaving.
Ahsoka leaving.
Yep.
Yeah. Because
that's what it left on.
This is it.
That was it.
Can you imagine leaving that?
I know. And we were left with that from like 2013 up until like I think the trailer got released in like 2017, 2018 was when the trailer dropped for that it was coming back.
Here's me saying it would be difficult to watch sort of week by week, waiting for like I actually watched that arc last week again, and just even as I was watching it, I thought, how on earth could you even end this episode and wait? I take it was week by week, was it?
Yep.
Yeah.
When it was week by week, and then there would be like I remember because it was on Cartoon Network was the channel it was on for us, and there was like the whole month of December there were no new episodes. They would like take a break from having new episodes because of like Christmas time and like people were going on break and stuff. And I was like, this is terrible. I'd have to wait an extra 6 weeks and they would just play reruns every week. It was terrible.
That final arc is a movie in and of itself, really.
Oh yeah.
And I remember waiting week for week for that arc to complete.
Yep.
Was torture. But I prefer, honestly, I prefer for shows to go week by week rather than all at once because it gives me something to look forward to, whether it's like in my school week or my work week or whatever. And it gives me something to do, like the Book of Boba Fett will start during my Christmas break. And so I'll go back home for my Christmas break. And I'll get to spend that time watching that with my dad, and then over like the 4 weeks of Christmas break, we'll get to anticipate the next episode, talk about what we think is going to happen, you know?
Yeah, it definitely helps with podcasting as well.
Yeah. Oh, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, you do have an idea.
But that's kind of one of the great things, even with the Bad Batch there, just actually, and I know there's some people don't like the speculating aspect, but that's what makes it fun in one sense as well. Maybe you don't want to talk about it and you don't want to read into things. I don't really like hearing spoilers personally, but that doesn't negate the fact that I love just thinking about what's going to be the next step. That's the whole point of a cliffhanger in each episode. So I can't complain with it now, but although thinking back to the Clone Wars, I think I would have struggled, to be honest, just wanting to get all of that content in. But that's because I know there's 7 seasons. You want to get to the end of it. Whereas if you don't know where the end is, I guess you can take it week by week a bit easier. But one of the things with the way things are kind of dropping at the moment, I'm not sure do you guys have like a plan for your podcast whenever there isn't new content dropping? Is it just sort of
We've been doing that like weekly topic thing that we've been doing. So like whereas like on this last podcast that went up, actually as of recording this, we put up that episode today. We try to like fill a gap. If there's a lot of Star Wars news that comes out, it kind of like fills that gap. But we try to come up with a weekly topic. So like there have been weeks where we talk about the Jedi or the Sith or like bounty hunters or different things like that. And we don't put like a ton of research into it per se. It's kind of like that, like we said, that kind of like sitting in like an Xbox party or like sitting at the lunch table just talking. Yeah. We just start discussing it. So when there's not a new episode, we kind of have like a weekly topic that we go over.
Yeah. You guys, whenever you're listening and watching, it just seems to be so natural. I know there's some fellas that would be big into soccer over here, or football as we call it, and they can rhyme off the names of every single footballer from the Nigerian team, and they can pronounce their names perfectly, and they know everybody that played 10 years ago and who won the cup that year, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's nothing in my life that I'm like that with at all. I don't remember names for anything, even with Star Wars, I'll remember like visually what you're talking about on Calamari and the prince, and I can picture that all in my head, and the names and all the kind of the stuff that if you had a brain you probably would remember just kind of goes off the top of my head. So unless I can see it visually, it just doesn't stick. So for me, like with the podcast, it's like yes, notes, typing things up, scribbling things down, and put my thoughts together. That's a slightly different sort of take on it, especially I'm going through the Clone Wars, I guess, as well as like a recap, or trying to kind of take it apart and think about certain aspects of it. But in the interval, my plan had been to kind of go through the books. So like whenever there hadn't been a release of things, to kind of read a chapter of Light of the Jedi or Heir to the Empire and kind of deal with that. But never goes to plan, unfortunately. But
well, I mean, also though, you're doing a
it
solo podcast. I could never imagine doing a podcast by myself. Like that's got a lot more preparation as far as notes goes, because when we run out of ideas, we'll just bounce off of each other. You know, if there's like a dull moment or something. But like if you're doing a solo podcast like you're doing, like that's something where you have to just have it all there, and if you run out, then
keep going.
Then that's it. Like,
yeah, it's a wrap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good anyway, though. Just even scrubbing things down, but it is time consuming, especially if you were to scan your eye across the dates whenever I first started. I think I only put the first one up in April, but like from April to May, there was like probably 30 episodes or something that were done, and so I was just like firing these things out left, right, and center as much as I could, recording, editing, watching, noting, and everything else. And it was too much, to be honest. But I was actually trying to get through the Clone Wars. I have no idea why I thought it was going to be possible, but from April to when the Bad Batch released, that was the aim, was to try and like do a whole recap before the Bad Batch came. And I got to like halfway through season 2. So, it was just it was a disaster that way. But still going to keep it going as we get along, just because there's so much in. Even as you get further into the Clone Wars, we were talking about like the themes and the lessons you can get from it. They kind of just get more intense and greater as you go through it too. So I'm going to try and keep that up as much as possible, but we'll get there. Life's busy.
So, right. Oh, we know all about it. It is.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that would be good though about having a sort of co-host setup as well, because it's like going to the gym with somebody. You're kind of bouncing off each other, not just for the content and discussions while you've got the camera rolling or the mic on, but it's sort of that push for you to kind of be there, or to get in front of the camera, or to have something. So it's good that way too.
It's also good because like Jacob hasn't been around for the past like few episodes because he's sick right now, so that's why he hasn't been able to show up to the last couple things. But that's what's nice is like if one of us can't make it, then the other ones can pick up the slack. Or like a couple weeks ago, Jacob and Jackson were not able to record, but we had an episode that we recorded a couple months prior that we had saved. So while they were gone, instead of me doing a podcast by myself, I was able to put together and edit the podcast that we had recorded a couple months prior, and we put that up instead. So that was kind of, it's very nice when you have like that team aspect, because you don't have to get so stressed out about like, meeting the deadline and blah, blah, blah. And like, we keep each other grounded. That's for sure.
I agree.
But sometimes we also hype each other up and go a little crazy on the podcast.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's good. That's what I actually like about watching the videos though as well, because you guys are quite animated whenever you're talking about things, and you can sort of, while I kind of just came across you on YouTube especially, is when I was sort of looking at the Seven Samurai movie from Akira Kurosawa, and a lot of his stuff is very expressive and hyper dramatic, and I was just laughing at some of the reactions. Like, you guys could have acted for Akira at some stage for some of the movies. So yeah, no, it's good. It's good to have that, and just kind of boost each other on too. So.
I actually I listened to your podcast. That was actually the first episode that I listened to from you, was the most recent one with Kurosawa.
I did too.
I listened to that in full while I was studying like last week. This is what made me ask you to be a guest on the podcast, was that episode, because I was listening to it because I saw you shouted us out on Twitter, and I was like, oh, that's cool. So whenever someone shouts us out, I look into like what their content is and stuff like that, and I like start talking to that person or whatever. And I listened to that episode, and like I love learning more about Star Wars and like the influences of Star Wars. And there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know. I didn't know a lot about Kurosawa's like his upbringing and his career. I know of his movies, and I've seen parts of his movies, and I know that is part of the influence of Star Wars, but I had no idea his story. And now, like, because of that, I appreciate that his influence so much more, and like the impact that he had on Star Wars to this day. So I mean, you even look at like The Mandalorian season 2, Ahsoka versus the Magistrate. That is straight up Kurosawa.
Yep.
So I really enjoyed that episode. So if anybody listening or watching the podcast has not checked that out, you're gonna have to
go do that.
You're gonna have to.
Thanks for the shout out with that one as well. But yeah, like I was just scribbling out sort of favorite episodes and different things like that, and the Jedi came up, and I hadn't actually thought about. I knew nothing about Kurosawa's work probably when I watched that Jedi episode, but just as I scribbled it down, it's like that. I haven't even seen Hidden Fortress yet, but you just know from seeing clips of that movie that there's so much of that has been taken from there.
Yeah.
And even with the sequels, I don't know if anybody has referenced his work for the way the sequels were shot, but the colors, if you've seen of his colored movies, like Ron or whatever, even if you haven't watched the whole thing, just getting some screen grabs of that, you can see the imagery that was kind of replicated in the sequel movies with the stark contrast of reds and the dark colors and all that kind of fartsy stuff kind of gets into my head. I did a bit of photography for a while, and so even just seeing how you could just pause pretty much every part of his movie and get a shot of it, and then applying that to the Clone Wars. Did I reference the Bounty Hunter episode in that podcast? I can't remember if I did or not.
I don't remember.
Well, I must have recorded it then there last. I've either put it in that episode or else it's on the next episode that's coming. But that Bounty Hunter podcast or episode from season 2, I think it is.
Is that the one where they're on Felucia and Hondo comes and all that stuff?
Yes, yeah. So
okay.
that was actually done for in memory of Kurosawa. Oh. So that's kind of where that was how I fed into sort of who is this guy, and that's why it's taken me so long to get another podcast out. But the next Clone Wars podcast I've done, or episode, is dealing with that one, and there's just so much in that even the way it's shot, even though it's animated, is just even drawing into the same sort of style of imagery that Kurosawa would have used, and it's really great whenever you can see it in the animated version. So if you haven't watched that episode in a while, I think it's called Bounty Hunters Season 2. Definitely give it a shout and check it out. And listen out for the Mandalorian theme tune in it. Bet you wouldn't have thought it was in there, but from the Mandalorian show, there's a little small clip of one wee scene, and you can hear what I'm presuming was the inspiration then for the theme tune that we had.
Oh, okay, interesting.
It's an interesting podcast or episode to go back to watch now in light of the Mandalorian and all the Bounty Hunter content that we're getting at the moment. So,
wow, how about that?
Nosy at that.
Very neat.
But I think that about wraps up all we've got right now.
I agree. Unless
you guys need to go get some studying done.
I have a study session for a midterm tomorrow. It's at 11 o'clock a.m. So I'm trying not to get 4 hours of sleep like I did last night.
Yeah, well, I think I said to you in our messaging, my 2 a.m. alarm clock is about to go off to tell me to get to bed too. So that's kind of
good timing, I guess, right? But yeah,
tomorrow is actually my commute day too, so in the office can't just roll out of bed and go to the study next door, unfortunately. But this is my life.
But hey, like, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and be on the podcast, especially with the time jump and everything. Yes, this was awesome for us, too. So so before we close this out, actually, what we like to do with these here is we like to plug people's social media here. So let's go ahead and pull that up.
Infinitely show the recording. I'm joking.
So right here, first of all, you've got the Twitter page for the Chosen One Star Wars podcast. I dig the logo, by the way.
Yes.
And then also here, you've got on Apple Podcasts. This is, if you hit the link on the Twitter page, this is what it takes you to. This is the episode that we were... Was it this one?
The intro.
Yeah, it had to have been the Akira Kurosawa introduction episode. This is the one that I listened to. This is a really, really good one. If you want to learn more about Kurosawa, I definitely recommend it because this was a really, really good one for us to watch, or for me to listen to. I got to learn more about Star Wars, and I consider myself to be very knowledgeable in Star Wars, and I learned something new. So, so definitely check out the podcast.
It's entitled as an introduction, so there's plenty more you can learn about him as well, and online from other guys too. So definitely have a search for that, and it'll kind of enrich. What's the word?
Yeah, I think that's a good word.
make Star Wars a bit richer for you next time you watch it as well when you see some of that stuff. So always helps. But thank you very much for having me on.
Of
I
course.
Really appreciate it. And the time difference is no issue with me whenever I get to speak to guys like yourselves. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so
we got through that okay.
This was a great conversation.
Yes,
so
really enjoyed it.
So this has been the most mediocre podcast in the Star Wars universe, the 1313 podcast. And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.